From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Inside Politics.
Hello, everyone. I'm News Channel 5's political analyst, Pat Nolan. Welcome to Inside Politics. It's been another week of unprecedented drama in Washington. As retiring Tennessee U.S. Senator Bob Corker and President Trump have renewed their war of words. To put all that in some perspective, both in terms of politics and foreign policy, Dr. Thomas Schwartz of Vanderbilt University, a history and political science professor and history professor there, is joining us for the show. Professor, thanks for coming on the show again.
Thank you for having me here.
Now, from the perspective of American history, I can't recall too many times when you've had the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee of the same party of the president and getting into the kind of verbal fights that you're beginning to see repeatedly between Senator Corker and the president. Where does that fit in the terms of American history?
Well, the most immediate example goes back about 50 years with Senator J. William Fulbright of Arkansas deciding to hold hearings to offer a critique of the president's policies on Vietnam, President Johnson's policies on Vietnam. Johnson had, in mid-1965, decided to escalate the war and send American soldiers to protect South Vietnam. Fulbright had been a critic of the use of force both in the Dominican Republic earlier in that year and then in Vietnam, and he decided to have a set of hearings calling on experts to testify, including the Secretary of State.
To put those in perspective to today, congressional hearings are constantly televised today, but as I recall, the Fulbright hearings were actually televised by the national networks, which was rather unique in those days.
It was actually unprecedented at the time that you had all three, and remember there were only 3 networks in the 1960s, all 3 showing almost gavel-to-gavel coverage of this, or not gavel-to-gavel, but basically allowing the hearings and preempting their regular programming in the mornings and daytime.
The soap operas.
Soap operas at that time to run these hearings, and this made it a national event.
And the interest about this is that Senator Corker, among the many things he said this past week about President Trump, also started talking about having some hearings in his foreign policy, his foreign affairs committee, and he's going to bring in the Secretary of State, he's going to bring in the Secretary of Defense and others to testify about issues and things he's seeing in how what President Trump has been doing, not in the policy area, but I guess in other areas, is impacting our relationships.
Yes, I think what he wants to do is, in a way, by talking to the top officials of the Trump administration, most of whom he's praised and who he thinks are actually doing a good job, he wants to, I think, articulate what the foreign policy of the Trump administration is. And in some ways, he may be also looking to constrain the president by having his top officials go public, in a way try to prevent the president from making any impulsive decisions by, in effect, having the policy outlined by his top advisors.
Well, it's a little bit of a political high wire act because he's bringing in the people who he's trying to protect within the administration. He's talked about Tillerson and the Secretary of Defense and the White House Chief of Staff as being the 3 people keeping the country away from chaos.
Yes.
But if he's bringing them in, he can't make them the focus of their wrath. He has to make sure that it's the president that's caused this. So is he going to talk about kneecapping the Secretary of State? Because he's used that term. He
has used that term. I think what will happen probably is that Secretary of State Tillerson will say that he doesn't feel that he was kneecapped. He made that statement actually on CNN's Jake Tapper about the castration comment that Corker had also made. And I think in a way this will give these officials an opportunity to defend their policies, to defend what they've done, and to basically make the case that the Trump administration does have a coherent and thought-out foreign policy, which many critics have argued does not actually exist.
Why is Secretary Tillerson still at the State Department? It has been the most weird, unique relationship I've ever seen for a Secretary of State with the president, who constantly undercuts many of the things he tries to do, yet says, "Oh, he's my guy."
Well, you know, the comparison that comes to mind historically to me is Al Haig and Ronald Reagan. Al Haig famously went on TV right after Ronald Reagan's assassination attempt and said, "I'm in charge here," which infuriated a lot of the people around Ronald Reagan. But it still took Ronald Reagan more than a year and a half, almost a year and a half, before he fired Haig. So it may be here that even though Trump and Tillerson are not getting along, that Trump is reluctant to fire his Secretary of State so soon, and that he may it may take some time. But there's clearly tensions there. Tillerson has been undercut, but it may be that it's just too soon for him to leave without both sides feeling like they've lost something.
Well, why doesn't Tillerson leave? I mean, certainly he I mean, he said things. He doesn't say that he called the president a moron, but he doesn't deny it either. So,
he does not. No.
So why doesn't he just? He doesn't need the job.
He doesn't need the job at all. He may feel, though, that he is doing, and I give him, at least I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he may feel that what he is doing in terms of trying to deal with American diplomacy, particularly in the Middle East, where he had some success recently in terms of trying to get the Saudis and Iraqis to work together, that he may feel that he is actually having some impact and he doesn't want to leave. But it's obviously a very difficult political position to be in.
If there's a vacancy there, a lot of people had talked about Bob Corker filling that. That would not seem very likely now. No. So what direction does the president go? Oh,
I think Nikki Haley is probably the front runner. She has established herself at the United Nations. In a way, there's another parallel there in the sense that President Clinton's, after Warren Christopher, about whom he actually dealt with well, he also put in Madeleine Albright, who had been his UN ambassador. That is a position that often has succeeded to the Secretary of State.
Nikki Haley's pedigree in terms of foreign affairs is pretty thin. I mean, she's been.
But so was Tillerson's. Tillerson had he had been a corporate executive, but he had very little actual direct experience.
Well, that generally says when somebody comes in like that, they're not the real power in the group. They're not the one making the decisions. Does that mean the president takes over more and more of the day-to-day, and does he know how to do that?
No, I think Haley has established herself actually quite directly. She's in Africa now, in the South Sudan. She's actually taken a very high profile and a quick learning curve. She's gotten good reviews, and I think in that sense, if there is a transition and she does come in, she will be seen as another one of these figures around the president who is protecting him from his bad judgment.
Is the Niger and South Sudan area the next real flashpoint we're going to see? It appears that as ISIS is being defeated in the Iraq-Syria area, that seems to be the next big, and most people don't even know we're there, and it appeared many of our political leaders in Washington had not been briefed about it.
Well, either they had not been briefed or they simply didn't. This was a relatively minor. The war on terror is seen as a war without borders, and in effect, the type of radical Islamic ideology that involves the war on terror has spread into parts of Africa. Boko Haram in Nigeria and the kidnapping of the women, the girls that took place. That seems to have been the origin of the beginning of the commitment to Niger and the rest. So I do think Africa could be a flashpoint because of the spread of the ideology and because of the radical groups there, both in Sudan but also in Somalia, where they've been very active. So that is a possibility. Dr.
Thomas Schwartz of Vanderbilt University, history and science professor there, is our guest. We're talking politics more on a foreign affairs level. Back to continue our conversation after this break.